Hi, Base Gardener here, and today I'm going to talk about China. So I went to China for a couple of months in 2015, and at the time I was concerned about a lot of the same things I am now. The decline of the West, and I wanted to go somewhere that was as different as I could find. And China seemed like that place. So I flew from Vancouver to Guangzhou to Beijing and started a 2-month trip from there. And I've got to say, I was absolutely amazed by just how advanced the country is. Everything from, their infrastructure, the high-speed rail, the office towers, the cleanliness of the streets. I was there during Chinese New Year, and even though there was just constant 24-hour partying, there was people combing through the streets, picking up all the garbage, keeping it spotless. But at the same time, once you left the city and you speed through the countryside on one of the bullet trains, you got the sense that the rural areas were very different. You could see burning garbage piles and dilapidated little hovels that people were living in. And you got the sense that this was very intentionally hidden from view. But if you paid attention, you could see. And the longer I spent there, as much as I absolutely love the place, I saw little hints of what it's like to live in a society that is so much less free than ours. So for instance, you can't use Google or Hotmail or Facebook. You're stuck with a Chinese app called WeChat. What I found when I talked to people over time was that people wouldn't hear any news that was critical of China, ever. So all they would get was the Xinhua, the Chinese, essentially state propaganda. And so, like, for instance, people were unaware of the Tiananmen Square massacre. It's just, you can't even search it anywhere there. It's just verboten. It's just, you can't look it up. So, the class divisions there are almost enforced through this system called the hukou system, where it's like a residency permit that kind of ties you to the area of China that you're born in. So basically, if you're born a poor person in a rural area, you're essentially stuck there. It's very difficult to change your hukou. But one thing I really loved about China and admire is that it's a very proud nation. There was just like organic expressions of love for the country all over the place. And like, for instance, I would go to the park and people would gather and sing the national anthem together with like a brass band in the background. It seems cheesy to us, but I actually found it quite beautiful. It really stuck with me. And people took incredible pride in what they did, even down to stuff like servers in restaurants. They were like proud, humble. They worked as fast as they could. They showed great appreciation, and they didn't act like they were just expecting a tip all the time. I found that really refreshing. And if you contrast that to us here in the West, we're essentially, I would argue now, a demoralized society. There's a video by a guy named Yuri Bezmenov. Many of you have probably seen it, but if you haven't, I really encourage you to check it out, where he describes working for the KGB and what essentially their largest portion of their budget and their work went towards essentially a slow process of trying to demoralize the West through basically infiltrating our institutions and pumping a bunch of like socialist Marxist propaganda that creates all of these divisions in society, right? You've got the classic Marxism, which is like the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, but that ends up going into absolutely everything, right? And we get divided along every single line we possibly can. And I think now we've reached that end state in many ways. And we have these kind of constant humiliation rituals now in the West, right? Like, think about the land acknowledgements that we do before any public event. Where essentially we're saying that, we live on stolen land. We don't have a right to be here because the land we're on is stolen. Well, what land in the world is not stolen? I mean, learn a little bit about history, and the entire world is filled with just like violence and people taking other people's land against their will. It sucks, but China doesn't feel bad for doing it. The Arab world doesn't feel bad for doing it. And I would argue neither should we. We need to have some pride in ourselves. There's in ancient Roman days, there was a practice called marching under the yoke, passing under the yoke. So if an army was defeated in battle and they decided to surrender, in order to maintain their lives, to save their lives, they would be forced to march under like an archway of spears that the enemy would hold up. And you'd have to bend really low in order to get underneath. And it was so humiliating to the ancient Romans that many of them would have rather died and would often opt for death over undergoing this humiliating ritual. And I think in many ways now, it's just something that we've become accustomed to. And it's a really awful thing, in my view. Having pride in our society is now considered to be far right. And yet, we have an entire month of pride that celebrates fringe sexual practices. So there you have it. And one of the things I find really confusing is that the people who seem to defend, countries like China and Iran are often like kind of the leftist hippie elements of our society. And the only reason that those people are able to exist is because of the freedoms of the liberal, tolerant West. In countries like China or Iran, if you decide you want to embrace a counterculture or you want to criticize the regime, you'll find yourself in jail. And not only will you be in jail, but multiple generations of your family will be at risk because of the stain that you've put on your family by criticizing the powers that be. So I really think this is a case of which way, Western man? We can either choose to get some cojones, have a little bit of pride in ourselves, pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and really start trying to work to better our society and believe in ourselves, or we better all start teaching our kids Mandarin.